It was a cold Asheville night after my son's funeral when I walked up to my own front door. My daughter-in-law stood there, rain on her shoulders, and dropped my suitcase into a puddle. "Go," she said. "This house isn't yours anymore." The sting wasn't just the rain. It was knowing I built those walls with 40 years of paychecks and calloused hands. I swallowed the hurt and didn't argue. She didn't know I'd already called Jonas Brackett, and that a forged signature with my name on it was about to see the light of day, with Sylvia Kern ready to speak. Tomorrow she'll file her papers at the courthouse. I'll be there first. Want to see how this ends? Follow the story to the finish, and tell me what city you're watching from. The church smelled faintly of old wood and damp coats, the kind of scent that clung to the walls after too many rainy Novembers. I sat in the back pew, my hands folded over the cane across my knees, watching the crowd gather for my son Byron's funeral. They spoke softly to one another, sharing memories and condolences, but rarely did their eyes shift toward me. The cold wasn't only in the air, it had settled into the silence around my presence. The hymns began, voices rising toward the high ceiling. Yet they carried no comfort. Faces turned toward the altar where Byron's photograph sat framed in black, surrounded by lilies. Each petal seemed more acknowledged than I was. For 72 years I had lived in Asheville, North Carolina, working and providing, shaping the very foundation my family walked upon. But here, at my own son's farewell, I was nothing more than a shadow at the edge of the service, memories pressed in with the chill. I saw Byron as a boy chasing after a ball in the backyard, the way he once clung to my shoulders after his mother's passing, how I worked double shifts so he could finish school without worry. Those sacrifices, once a point of pride, now seemed invisible. Few mourners approached me. A brief nod here, a hurried squeeze of the hand there. It was as though my grief was inconvenient, something to be skirted around. The emptiness of their distance stung deeper than the loss itself. Then I caught Marla's eyes. My daughter-in-law was standing near the front, her dark coat pressed neatly around her shoulders, her face warm as she greeted a neighbor. But when her gaze slid over me, the warmth froze into ice. No words were spoken, no gesture made, but the contempt in her eyes was sharper than any blade. Sylvia Kern, my neighbor for more than 30 years, happened to glance my way at that very moment. Our eyes met, and I saw her brow furrow, as if she too recognized the dismissal I had just endured. It wasn't the first time Marla had looked at me that way, but never had it been so public, so final. Her contempt struck me harder than the hymn's closing note. It told me I was no longer part of this family, not even welcome in my son's last hour of remembrance. My chest tightened, though not from age or weakness, from the clear understanding that my presence here was tolerated at best. Up front, a seat sat conspicuously empty, every row filled with distant relatives and acquaintances. Yet that chair, near the casket, meant for someone closest to Byron, remained untouched. Marla's choice was deliberate. I wasn't offered the seat because I wasn't considered worthy of it. That empty chair spoke louder than any eulogy. I had been pushed aside in my own bloodline story. The seat symbolized the shift of power, the rewriting of place, the quiet banishment that began not after Byron's death, but the moment she married into my family. The service moved on, prayers spoken, scripture read. I kept silent, my face calm, but behind my eyes, thoughts spun sharp. Every detail Marla orchestrated, every word, every gesture, signaled that this day wasn't just about laying Byron to rest. It was also about laying me aside. As the pastor gave his closing blessing, my eyes drifted forward again. Marla leaned toward a man seated in the front row, dressed in a dark suit that seemed too polished for a neighbor and too formal for a distant cousin. She whispered something into his ear, her lips curving into a smile that didn't match the sorrowful setting. The man nodded once, businesslike. The hymns faded, but the echo of that whispered conversation clung to me more than the prayers ever could. My hand tightened on my cane. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something far colder than the November air outside. As the last note drifted away, I caught Marla leaning closer to that suited stranger, her smile warm, her voice sharp, and I knew the funeral was only the beginning of my exile. The ride back from the church was as quiet as the grave we had just left behind. The rain started as a light mist on the windshield, each drop stretching into thin streaks under the dim glow of the street lamps. The silence pressed hard, louder than any hymn sung that evening. Marla's stare during the service lingered in memory. It hadn't carried grief, not even anger, but something colder, something final. Pulling into the driveway felt surreal. The same driveway Byron and I had poured concrete for 30 years ago. The same path where a younger Clara May once wobbled on her bike while I jogged beside her. Yet tonight, the house glared back like a stranger. Marla was already at the door. No umbrella, no coat, just standing there in the rain as though the storm itself bowed to her will. "You don't belong here anymore," she said before I could even reach the steps. Her voice was flat, deliberate, not a tremble. Not a hint of sorrow for the man who had once been her second father. The words bit deeper than the November chill. I steadied myself, my hand brushing the porch rail I'd sanded down only last summer. She didn't budge. "It's my home now. Byron left it to me and Clara. You've done your part, Elmer. Time to move on." No argument could undo years of bitterness she had been storing like a storm cloud. I opened my mouth, but before any sound came, the door swung wider, and 2 battered suitcases landed on the porch with a thud. They toppled, spilling a shirt and an old pair of boots into the rain. Each drop soaked through quickly, as if eager to erase every trace of me from the threshold. I bent down slowly, the humiliation burning more than the cold water. Those bags carried not just clothes, but decades of labor, overtime shifts, busted knuckles, late nights patching the roof, fixing the furnace. My entire life had built the walls standing behind her, and now I was nothing more than a trespasser. Inside, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Through the living room window stood Clara May, her small face pressed against the glass, her hand leaving a fogged print on the pane. Her eyes, confused, frightened, searched for answers I couldn't give. I raised a trembling hand halfway, but Marla shifted, blocking the view, and drew the curtains closed. That small handprint stayed on the glass, etched in my mind more permanent than stone. I didn't shout, didn't plead. Silence carried more weight than any argument could. Gathering what I could, I straightened my back and stepped off the porch. The storm welcomed me, drenching my jacket, turning the path into mud. Each step away was heavier than the last, not from the luggage but from the severing of everything once called home. At the corner, I paused. The streetlight flickered, and across the way, a faint glow appeared from a porch lamp. Sylvia Kern's silhouette stood by her window, her eyes following every movement. She had seen it all, the bags, the rain, the cruelty. That meant Marla's truth wouldn't stay hidden forever. Through the rain, I saw Sylvia Kern's porch light flicker on. She had seen everything, and that meant Marla's cruelty would not stay hidden. The cheap motel room smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee. Morning light slipped through the thin curtains, laying a pale stripe across the bed where I'd collapsed the night before. Clothes clung to me still damp from the storm, and the ache in my bones told me I hadn't rested at all. Beside the chair in the corner sat my suitcase, battered, heavy, and scarred by the night's cruelty. Seeing it there reminded me I was no longer a man returning home, but a guest in a place meant for strangers. The sound of rain tapping the window pulled me back into the memory I wanted to forget. Marla's hands, without hesitation, had lifted my suitcase and dropped it onto the porch. It hadn't been just luggage, it was fragments of a life, decades of labor, and pieces of Byron's childhood crammed together and tossed into the storm. Shirts I had worn to his baseball games, framed photographs from graduations, papers carefully saved over the years, all scattered like trash on the wet boards. Watching it happen had cut deeper than any insult. Each thud of the suitcase, each splash of rain soaking into the fabric, felt like a declaration that my place in that home no longer existed. I remembered standing there frozen, the porch light throwing shadows across Marla's face as she sneered, her words colder than the rain. That moment seared itself into me, not just for the rejection, but for the realization that she intended it to be permanent. Through the sheets of rain, I had caught sight of Clara May's face in the window, her small hand pressed against the glass, her eyes wide and pleading. She didn't understand why her grandfather was left outside, or why the house that had once been filled with laughter now shut him out. I couldn't reach her, couldn't offer comfort. That helplessness weighed heavier than the suitcase itself. But there had been another pair of eyes watching. Across the street, Sylvia Kern's porch light had flickered on. I remembered glancing over, drenched and shivering, and meeting her gaze. She didn't turn away. She didn't pretend she hadn't seen. In that silent exchange, I clung to the only shred of dignity left to me. Someone knew the truth of what had been done. By daylight, my legs carried me back toward the neighborhood, though every step felt like trespassing on my own life. The house stood in quiet defiance, its familiar shape now foreign. Fresh lumber leaned against the siding, nails and tools laid out as if Marla had already begun reshaping what I had built. The lawn bore marks of recent work, hints that she had wasted no time in making it hers. Each nail driven into those walls might as well have been driven into my chest. I kept my distance, standing on the sidewalk, not daring to walk up the drive. Memories rushed in, the sound of Byron's laughter on the porch, the smell of Sunday dinners drifting out the window, Clara's bicycle wobbling down the path. They collided with the present reality. Shutters painted a color I hadn't chosen, curtains pulled tight against me, and my own footsteps feeling foreign on familiar ground. Then came Sylvia's voice, soft but steady, breaking through my thoughts. She approached with cautious steps, her coat pulled against the chill. Her eyes carried both sorrow and fire as she laid a hand gently on my arm. "I saw it all," she said quietly, the words falling heavier than any rain. My throat tightened, not from shame this time, but from the fragile validation her presence gave. We stood there together on the sidewalk, the house looming before us. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried both comfort and warning. "Elmer, what she did wasn't just cruelty, it was planned." Her words lingered, heavy with implication, and I knew then the storm had only begun. The image of that empty chair lingered in my mind like a splinter that wouldn't work its way out. It wasn't just a piece of furniture at the front of the church during Byron's funeral. It was a statement. Everyone else had a place, a seat among the mourners. I was left in the shadows, standing in the back like an uninvited guest at my own son's farewell. That chair should have been mine. It should have held the weight of a father's grief. Instead, it sat unclaimed, and I could feel Marla's hand in it, a deliberate gesture to show where I no longer belonged. Later that week, I tried to rejoin the rhythm of community life. The church hosted a small gathering, a potluck in the basement where casseroles and pies usually softened the sharp edges of loss. I walked in quietly, nodding to faces I had known for decades. But the air shifted. Conversations hushed when I passed, and the glances I caught weren't warm condolences. They were pity at best, suspicion at worst. No one offered me the seat near the front, the place usually reserved for an elder. I drifted to the back again, the empty chair from the funeral echoing in my mind. That absence had followed me here, a ghost that whispered, "You've been erased." Marla arrived late, dressed sharp in dark tones that seemed less like mourning and more like performance. She laughed easily with a group of women, then turned and caught me watching. For a moment, her smile froze. I decided I couldn't stay silent anymore. When the crowd thinned, I approached her near the hallway where coats hung. "Why was the chair left empty?" My voice came out calm but edged. Her eyes narrowed, the warmth she showed others gone in an instant. "Because that wasn't your place anymore," she said flatly. "You've had your time, Elmer. Things are different now." It wasn't grief speaking, it was possession. A claim to authority, to the life Byron left behind. My chest tightened, but I held her gaze. I wanted to argue, to remind her of the years I poured into building not just the house but the family. Instead, I swallowed the words. Silence had always been my shield, but now it felt like a chain. The next evening, I found myself at a small diner on the edge of town. Jonas Brackett sat across from me, nursing a black coffee like it was the only thing tethering him to the world. He had been an acquaintance of mine years back, a steady man with a lawyer's mind and a friend's patience. "I saw you at the service," Jonas said softly. And I saw her. Marla's not just grieving, Elmer. She's maneuvering. His words hit with the weight of truth I already sensed. I told him about the empty chair, about the way she whispered with that stranger in the dark suit during the funeral. Jonas leaned in, listening without interruption. Then he set his cup down with care. "If she's talking to lawyers, you need to be ready," he said. "This isn't about mourning your son. This is about what she thinks she can take." The thought chilled me more than the November air. Legal battles weren't just arguments, they were wars fought on paper, with signatures sharper than knives. I never imagined I'd need to defend my right to my own home, my place as a father, a grandfather. But Jonas's calm voice carried a warning. That night in my motel room, the shadows stretched long, and the hum of the heater offered little comfort. My mind kept circling back to that empty chair, Marla's cold dismissal, and Jonas's steady gaze across the diner table. He had left me with words that refused to let me sleep. "Elmer, this isn't just family drama. It's a plan to erase you." The diner's neon sign still burned in my mind long after I left Jonas that night. His words kept circling, steady but sharp. "If she's whispering with lawyers, you need to be ready." Fear sat heavy in my chest, but it wasn't the kind that froze a man. It was the kind that made his back straighten. Silence had been my shield for too long, but even a shield grows useless if you never raise it. Morning came gray and wet, November drizzle soaking the streets of Asheville. I walked past the old oak trees toward the house I had built with my own hands. Each step was measured, calm, but my pulse carried the weight of a drumbeat. The porch where my suitcase had once been dumped still bore the faint water stains from that night. Marla answered the door before I even knocked. Her arms folded, lips pressed tight, eyes sharp as glass. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. My voice surprised me. Calm, even. "This house still carries my sweat in its beams. Don't mistake silence for surrender. I won't be erased." Her laugh was short, cold. "Elmer, you had your time. Byron's gone. And this house is mine to run now. You're a guest, if that." I stepped closer, enough that she had to tilt her chin upward. "Guest? I laid the first brick here before Byron could even spell his name. Don't try to tell me where I belong." Her smirk deepened, but the words she didn't say carried more venom than those she did. She thought she had already won. From behind her, a small voice called softly. Clara May appeared in the hallway, clutching a folded paper in her hands. Marla's eyes rolled, but the child slipped past her mother and pressed the paper into my palm before darting back. I unfolded it slowly. Crayons filled the page. Our house, rough and bright, with me drawn standing at the doorway, smiling. Above it, she had written in her careful letters, "Grandpa's home." That little drawing burned brighter than any insult Marla could throw. It was proof that at least one heart still saw me not as an intruder, but as family. I folded it neatly, tucking it inside my jacket like a secret oath. Marla hissed, "Don't put ideas in her head." I met her glare with steady eyes. "You can lock me out of the door, but you can't lock me out of her memory." She slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. The sound followed me down the steps, but my heart carried something stronger than shame. It carried resolve. Later that afternoon, I met Jonas again at the same diner. He looked tired, his tie loosened, but his eyes were alert. "She's moving faster than I thought," he said, sliding into the booth. "I've heard her name come up in county filings, property transfers, deeds, things you should have signed but didn't." A chill swept through me. "She's trying to put the house in her name?" He nodded slowly. "Or worse, erase you from it altogether." "I can't confirm yet, but Elmer, you need to gather every record you can. Proof of purchase, tax receipts, even photographs, anything that ties you to this house." I stared at the coffee in front of me, steam curling like questions I hadn't wanted to ask. For years I thought my silence would keep the peace. I thought patience was dignity, Jonas's voice dropped, firm. Sometimes silence is what they use against you. Don't let her rewrite what's yours. The paper in my pocket felt heavy, the child's drawing of home, my name sketched into crayon walls. That was the truest deed I could imagine. When I left the diner, the sky had cleared just enough for a sliver of sun to cut through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, I didn't just feel like a man being cast out. I felt like a man beginning to fight back. Back in my motel room, I spread old files across the table, yellowed papers and brittle photographs that told the story Marla wanted to bury. Byron as a boy, helping me hammer nails. Clara as a toddler on the porch swing I built. Every scrap was a reminder. I belonged here. Sleep didn't come easy. But before my eyes finally closed, Jonas's words returned, heavier this time. He had slid a folder across the table earlier, his eyes never leaving mine. "Elmer," he'd said, voice steady. "There's a paper with your name missing from it, and you need to see it before she buries it for good." The room felt smaller as those words echoed, and I knew the storm wasn't behind me. It was gathering strength. Sleep never found me that night. The motel walls creaked with every gust of wind, and each sound seemed to carry Marla's voice whispering in the dark, erasing me one stroke of a pen at a time. Jonas's warning replayed again and again, a paper with your name missing from it. That thought gnawed at me more than the damp chill in the room or the thin blanket that couldn't keep out the December cold. Fear coiled tight in my chest, but beneath it, something harder began to form. If she truly had gone so far, then silence was no longer survival. Silence would be my execution. By morning, I had made up my mind. Jonas had said he'd show me what he'd found. My boots were still wet from the rain, but I laced them anyway, telling myself that whatever I saw today, it would not break me. Not entirely. At his office, Jonas set a manila folder on the desk with the kind of care a doctor gives when delivering bad news. My hands trembled before I even touched it. When the page slid into view, my breath caught. It was a property transfer, my house, my land, the very place where Byron had grown up, where Clara had played on the porch, where my wife and I had built a life. And there, in dark ink, sat my signature. Only it wasn't mine. I had never signed those lines. The curves were stiff, the strokes too smooth, like someone had practiced copying me. My stomach turned. The betrayal sharper than any insult Marla had thrown. This wasn't contempt in her eyes anymore. This was ambition, carved into paper. Jonas leaned back, watching me. "That's not your hand, Elmer. I know it, and if I can see it, a judge can too. But she's close to filing it. Once it's in the county records, the fight gets harder." The room felt smaller, airtight. My whole life had been reduced to a forged line on a page. But instead of crushing me, the sight of it lit a fire. If she wanted a war, I would not go quietly. I left Jonas's office with the folder under my arm, the December air cutting sharp at my lungs. My steps carried me not toward the motel, but toward Sylvia's house. She opened her door before I even knocked, as though she had been waiting. Her gray eyes softened the moment she saw my face. "Elmer," she said gently, "come inside." I told her about the document. She listened without flinching, then nodded slowly. "I've seen people coming and going from her place, strangers carrying files, meeting late. I thought it strange at the time." She paused, then added, "And I know your handwriting. You used to sign Christmas cards for the whole block. That's not yours. If you need me, I'll say it in court." Her words steadied me more than the coffee she poured. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel entirely alone. Someone else had seen. Someone else believed. It mattered. That evening, I spread papers across the motel bed, tax receipts, utility bills, the mortgage deed with my signature in bold strokes. Each one was proof. Each one a brick in the wall I needed to build against her scheme. Jonas had told me to gather everything. And I would. Silence would not be surrender anymore. It would be strategy, waiting for the right strike. As I packed the folder tight, Jonas's voice echoed in my mind. "She hasn't filed it yet, Elmer, but she will. And soon." The thought chilled me, but it also gave me purpose. Time was still mine to claim. Marla had tried to erase me with a pen, but I wasn't done writing. The courthouse loomed against the gray December sky, its stone steps slick with frost. Each step upward carried more weight than my legs cared to admit. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the smell of old paper mixed with damp winter coats clung to the air. My heart pounded slow but steady. This was no longer about grief. It was about survival. Through the narrow hallway, I spotted her. Marla stood at the clerk's counter, her tailored coat crisp and spotless. In her hands, a folder, and inside it the lie she'd crafted. I watched as she slid documents forward, her polished nails tapping the table with confidence. The clerk glanced at them, flipping through the pages. My stomach twisted when I noticed the notary seal, crooked, faded, and nothing like the ones I'd used over the years in legitimate dealings. I stepped closer, keeping my voice low. "That isn't your paper to file." She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned slightly, lips curling into the smirk I'd seen at Byron's graveside. "Elmer, you should be resting at your motel, not embarrassing yourself here." Her voice dropped to a whisper meant for me alone. "No one will believe you. You look tired, confused, old." Her words burned hotter than the courthouse heat. I straightened, steadying my breath. "I know what I built, and I know a forgery when I see it." She leaned in, the scent of her perfume sharp, foreign. "Then prove it. Until you do, this house is mine." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is sharper than shouting. By afternoon, the storm of rumors had already swept through town. Harold Fitch cornered me outside the diner, his face tight with awkward pity. "Elmer," he muttered, "folks are saying you sold the house yourself. They say you want it out. That maybe your mind isn't what it used to be." His words landed harder than the cold wind. I shook my head, but he didn't meet my eyes. The gossip had worked. Marla's poison spread faster than truth. Later, Sylvia called to tell me she'd overheard the same in the grocery line. Mothers whispering that Clara May's grandfather had gone senile, that he couldn't handle a home anymore. They laughed softly, as if stripping dignity were casual sport. That night, Clara May came to me, her little boots wet from the yard. She clutched her school bag, eyes rimmed red. "Grandpa," she whispered, "is it true? Did you not want to live with us anymore?" Her words sliced deeper than Marla's lies ever could. I knelt down, ignoring the ache in my knees, and held her face in my hands. "Sweetheart, don't you ever believe that? This house, that family, it's all I've ever wanted. It's where you belong, where I belong." She nodded slowly, but I saw the shadow in her eyes. A child should never have to doubt love because of an adult's scheme. My jaw clenched as I hugged her tight. Marla hadn't just stolen walls and roof, she was reaching for Clara's trust. The next day, Jonas and I sat in his office, the blinds drawn against the pale winter sun. He spoke plainly, his voice steady. "Elmer, gossip is wind. It can knock you off balance. But it doesn't change the law. What we need are anchors, proof, records, samples of your handwriting. If we can show inconsistency, the forgery crumbles." I nodded, fingers resting on the stack of papers I'd begun to gather. Bills paid on time, repairs done with my own 2 hands. Decades of receipts and tax records. My life wasn't just memory, it was written proof. Jonas tapped his pen against the folder. "We'll fight this, but you must be ready. She's cunning, and she won't stop until you're erased." When I left the courthouse parking lot the following week, I saw her waiting by the car, coat collar pulled high. Her smile was thin, almost rehearsed. She stepped close, low enough that only I could hear. "By the time I'm finished, even Clara won't trust you," she hissed. "She'll see you as nothing more than a bitter old man who couldn't let go." I looked at her, my silence carrying more weight than words. Inside, though, my resolve burned. This was no longer just about a deed or a roof. It was about legacy, Byron's memory, Clara's future, and the dignity I refused to surrender. Her words clung to me like winter frost. Even Clara was a pawn in her game. The December air bit into my lungs as I stood outside the house that once felt like the center of my world. Marla had called for a family discussion, but everyone knew it would be more spectacle than conversation. Jonas had warned me not to stay silent this time. "Silence will be taken as surrender," he said. His words echoed in my ears as I crossed the porch. Inside, the living room brimmed with faces, relatives, neighbors, and Harold Fitch perched near the mantel like he'd been appointed judge of it all. Clara May sat quietly in the corner, her small hands fidgeting with a folded piece of paper. She looked at me, her eyes wide and uncertain, and I gave her the faintest nod. If I was going to withstand this storm, it would be for her. Marla stood tall in the center, controlling the room with a smile that masked her venom. She wasted no time. "We're here to clear the air," she announced, holding up a folder. "My father-in-law has been confused, perhaps even unstable. He willingly signed away the house, but now he tries to rewrite the truth. This is the document, proof of his decision." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. She laid the papers down for all to see. My stomach clenched at the sight of my name scrawled beneath her forged lines. It was one thing to face betrayal in whispers, another to see it paraded before neighbors like a trophy. Harold Fitch cleared his throat, muttering just loud enough for people to hear. "If the paper says so, maybe he should let it be." My hands trembled, but not with fear, this time, with resolve. Slowly, I rose from my seat. The chatter dimmed as the room realized I would not be silent. "That signature is a lie," I said, steadying my voice. "I never signed away my home, every nail, every board. I worked for, with my own 2 hands. Byron's hands, too, and Marla. You know it." Marla's smirk never wavered. "Old men often forget what they've done," she said sweetly. "This isn't about what you feel, it's about the law." The air thickened, my chest tight with anger, when a new voice cut through. Sylvia Kern stepped forward from the back. Her calm presence hushed the room more effectively than any shout. "I saw men leaving Marla's house weeks ago," she said. "They carried files and papers. That was no lawyer doing honest work. That was scheming." The crowd shifted, murmurs of doubt growing louder. Eyes turned from me to Marla, the weight of Sylvia's testimony pressing down. Clara May's face brightened, just a flicker of hope at seeing someone defend me. Jonas seized the moment. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and laid it on the coffee table. "These documents," he said, "show inconsistencies in the notarization of Marla's so-called transfer. The stamp is invalid. The dates don't match. This isn't just questionable, it's fraud." The room erupted in overlapping voices, shock, indignation, whispers of betrayal. Harold Fitch shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his certainty shaken. For the first time, Marla's control over the narrative cracked, but she didn't falter. She leaned closer, her smile sharper than any blade. "You think this is over? You don't know what I still have." Her eyes met mine, cold and deliberate. The chatter dimmed into uneasy silence as her words hung in the air, heavier than the forged paper on the table. Clara May clutched her folded drawing tighter, her knuckles pale. I stood there, surrounded by neighbors and family, realizing the battle had only just begun. Her final words rang in my ears long after. "This house isn't the only thing I've taken from you, Elmer." The air still felt heavy from the family meeting. Though days had passed, folks in Asheville didn't let things like that fade quick. Word had gotten around, Marla's shouting, Sylvia stepping forward, Jonas's calm voice cutting through the lies. Walking down Main Street, I caught the stares. Not all of them pitied me anymore. Some were curious, others cautious. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely erased. The gossip mill churned different now. Once, the whispers painted me as an old man too tired to fight, too confused to know what I'd signed. Now I heard another version, neighbors questioning Marla's polished smile, wondering why she'd been so quick to push me aside. Relief didn't come easy, but it was there, faint as a candle flickering in a drafty room. At the diner that morning, Harold Fitch slid into the booth across from me. His hat rested in his hands, his eyes darting like a man unsure if he belonged. For months, Harold had echoed Marla's stories, treating me like the town's tragic fool. But now he cleared his throat and said, "Elmer, maybe I got it wrong. Folks are starting to talk. Maybe that girl ain't telling it straight." I studied him carefully. Harold wasn't quick to change sides unless the ground had shifted beneath his feet. His words weren't an apology. Not yet. But they were something close. "You saw it yourself," I told him, voice steady. "She's rewriting what isn't hers to touch." He nodded, uncomfortable, and muttered, "People are noticing. That's all I'll say." Then he left, shoulders hunched, as though admitting even that much was dangerous. Still, it meant something. The cracks in Marla's mask were spreading. Later that afternoon, Clara May bounded into the motel room where I'd been staying, her cheeks flushed pink from the December air, her backpack bouncing as she set it down. She hesitated for a moment before pulling out a folded piece of paper. "Grandpa," she said, her voice trembling but proud. "I told them at school." I opened the paper. Inside was a simple drawing, our house, with me standing at the door, smiling. Above it, in wobbly letters, she'd written, "He belongs here." She explained how some classmates had repeated their parents' whispers. They said her grandfather didn't want to live there anymore, that he'd given up. Clara stood tall in the cafeteria and told them, "My grandpa's the strongest man I know. He never gave up on us." Hearing her retell it, tears burned my eyes, though I swallowed hard to keep them from falling. That little girl's courage held me together tighter than any lawyer's brief. When she left, the room felt quieter, but her words stayed. They gave me strength to sit down with Jonas later that night and go over every detail of his legal plan, page after page, proof after proof. I saw not just my fight for property would fight, but a fight for truth, for the future Clara deserved to know. Jonas leaned back in his chair, expression firm. "The tide's turning," he said. "People doubt her now, but don't mistake gossip for victory. Marla won't let this go." His warning sat like a stone in my gut. That evening, as I walked past the house that used to be mine, I saw her on the porch, phone pressed to her ear. She laughed softly, eyes narrowing as she spotted me across the street. That smug smile wasn't one of defeat. It was of someone planning her next strike. Jonas's warning rang in my head. Be ready. She won't let this slip without striking back. The December cold wrapped around me, sharper than ever. I knew this wasn't the end of her schemes. It was only the pause before another blow. Jonas called me into his office first thing that morning. The chill of January had followed me inside, and I could see my breath clouding briefly before the warmth of the old radiator filled the room. Jonas had a manila folder laid out on his desk, the edges of the papers slightly curled, as if they had already been thumbed through in frustration. He gestured for me to sit, and when I did, his words came slow but heavy. "She's filed a claim, Elmer," he said. "Not just about the house this time. She's trying to get her hands on Byron's remaining financial assets, your son's estate." The words settled like ice in my chest. I had thought losing the house was the deepest cut, but here was Marla, digging into the remnants of my son's life, clawing at whatever might still carry his name. A part of me wanted to slam the table, to let anger pour out. But instead, I just nodded, my jaw tight. I had already learned that outbursts only fed her story of me as unstable. Jonas leaned forward, his glasses sliding down slightly as his eyes locked on mine. "But listen carefully. This claim is sloppy. Too sloppy. If we press, it could collapse under its own weight." I swallowed hard. Fear and determination pulled at me in equal measure. She was escalating, but perhaps, for the first time, her greed had overreached. We went over the documents together, line by line. Jonas pointed out inconsistencies, dates that didn't align with Byron's passing, signatures that were photocopied rather than original, and a notary's mark that didn't even exist in Buncombe County. "Her arrogance is showing," Jonas murmured. "This could backfire. A judge won't take kindly to fabricated claims on a dead man's estate." For a moment, a flicker of relief touched me. Maybe her ambition had carried her too far. Maybe the law would finally catch up to her lies. Still, the thought of Marla wielding papers with my son's name on them was unbearable. She's twisting Byron's memory into a weapon, I whispered, my throat tightening. And she's using his daughter as cover while she does it. Jonas reached across the desk, his hand firm on the folder. Then it's time we use every ounce of truth left. You have more allies than you think, Elmer and Clara. She's stronger than either of us give her credit for. That strength showed itself sooner than I expected. At the community hearing later that week, the room was packed with neighbors and a handful of officials. Marla strutted in first, clutching a binder of papers, her smile tight but triumphant. I could feel the eyes of the town on me, some still cautious, some curious. For weeks, I had been the man whispered about, the father who supposedly signed away his home in sanity. Then Clara's small hand slipped into mine. She had insisted on coming, her chin lifted higher than I had ever seen. When the floor opened for public comment, Clara stood up, her voice trembling at first but steadying with each word. My grandpa isn't the man she says he is, she declared, her eyes scanning the room. He's the one who makes me breakfast when Mom's too busy. He's the one who taught me to ride my bike, and he's the one who tucks me in when no one else remembers. If he signed something, it wasn't him, it was a trick. He would never choose to leave me. The silence that followed her words was heavier than any gavel. Even the officials shifted uncomfortably. And for the first time, I saw Marla's expression falter, just for a second. The mask cracked. After the hearing, Harold Fitch approached me outside the building. His reputation in town was one of blunt honesty, and until now, he had kept me at arm's length, repeating Marla's rumors as if they might be true. But that day, his tone shifted. Elmer, he said slowly, I've been hearing things about Marla that don't sit right. Folks are starting to talk. They think maybe she's not as honest as she claims. The weight of his words surprised me. Harold wasn't offering friendship, but his admission marked a change. Gossip. Once my enemy was beginning to turn its gaze in Marla's direction. Small cracks were spreading in the wall she had built around her lies. When the session ended, I walked out with Jonas and Clara by my side. The winter sun was low, casting long shadows across the courthouse steps. I should have felt lighter, vindicated even, but I knew Marla too well to mistake a stumble for defeat. Sure enough, as we reached the parking lot, she was waiting. Her coat was drawn tight, but her smirk was sharp as ever. She stepped close, so only I could hear. You think this is over, old man? She whispered, her breath sharp against the cold. You haven't seen anything yet. Her words slithered through me, more chilling than the wind that cut across the lot. Clara squeezed my hand tighter, sensing the tension, and Jonas gave a small shake of his head, as if to remind me, silence was still strategy. I walked past her without a word, but inside I knew the storm was far from over. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a mix that reminded me of the years I spent paying taxes and signing deeds that proved my life's work. Now those same papers, my name and signature, were being used against me, twisted into weapons. Jonas sat beside me, his calm presence steadying the storm inside my chest. The judge shuffled through the files Marla had submitted. I could see her in the corner of my eye, confident as ever, lips pressed into that smug line she wore like armor. My hands trembled, but not from fear. This was anger, measured and deep, waiting for its moment. Jonas rose first, pointing out small but undeniable flaws, notarizations that didn't line up, stamps used on days when the office had been closed, handwriting that bore the marks of a sloppy imitation. Each word chipped away at Marla's wall of lies. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses, and asked a pointed question. Mrs. Duval, can you explain these inconsistencies? Her answer faltered. For the first time, her voice wavered. She glanced back toward the crowd, toward Harold Fitch and Sylvia Kern sitting quietly in the benches, their faces grim but watchful. The silence in the room pressed heavy, like the whole community was waiting to see if she would stumble. When the ruling came down on her first claim, it was like the air shifted. The judge dismissed it outright, calling it without sufficient merit. A ripple of whispers ran through the gallery. Heads turned, not toward me, but toward her, and for the first time, Marla's mask cracked, her jaw tightened. and her eyes darted to mine with something I hadn't seen before. Doubt. Vindication should have felt sweet, but it landed heavy. This wasn't victory. Not yet. It was a step, a breath of air after nearly drowning. That night, Clara May curled up beside me on the motel bed. She was quiet, her small hand clutching mine. Finally, she whispered, "Grandpa, do you think you can forgive her?" The question nearly broke me. Forgive? After everything, the forged papers, the lies, the humiliation in front of neighbors? My instinct screamed no, but when I looked into Clara's wide eyes, I saw Byron's softness there. The part of him that always wanted peace. The ache of missing him pressed down hard. I kissed her forehead and answered slowly, "I don't know if I can forgive her, Clara, but I won't let anger make me forget who I am, and I won't let her take you away from the truth." The next day, Sylvia met me on her porch. She handed me a cup of tea, her gaze steady. "Elmer, forgiveness doesn't mean giving up. It just means you don't let her poison live in your heart. You still fight. You still protect Clara and what's yours. But you do it on your terms, not hers." Her words sank deep, shaping something in me. For too long, Marla had dictated the rhythm of my days. Maybe it was time to reclaim not just my house, but my dignity. Later, in the courthouse hallway, I found myself standing face to face with Marla. No judge, no lawyer, no neighbor, just her and me. For once, her confidence looked thin. Her eyes flickered, unsettled. I spoke quietly, but every word was anchored in steel. "You can take the bricks and boards, Marla. You can take my house if that's what you want, but you'll never take the truth. Clara will know who her grandfather really is, and you can't erase that." For a heartbeat, I thought she might lash out, scream, deny. Instead, she leaned closer, her whisper sharp enough to chill bone. "Then I'll take something else." Her breath brushed my ear, her smile cold, and the meaning in her words twisted my stomach into knots. I stood frozen in that hallway as she walked away, her heels clicking like a countdown. The fight wasn't over, it was only turning darker. The courtroom was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Wooden benches creaked as neighbors, acquaintances, and curious townsfolk settled in. My palms rested flat against the table in front of me, steady, though my heart thundered in my chest. Jonas Brackett, calm as ever, sat beside me, across the aisle. Marla's painted smile strained at the corners, her confidence thinner than the ice on the river outside. Jonas began his presentation without theatrics, letting the truth carry its own weight. He laid out the forged signatures first, mine reproduced side by side with the crude imitation Marla had submitted. Then came the bank records, transfers tied to her hand, not mine. Finally, Harold Fitch, stiff in his jacket, gave testimony of what he had overheard. Marla bragging about handling me, about how easy it was to make a man of my age look incompetent. The words stung, but the sting was sweetened by the fact that, this time, she was the one cornered, under cross-examination. Marla faltered. Her smirk slipped into twitching lips. Her voice cracked as Jonas pressed her. The notary stamps, the witnesses who never existed, the paper trail pointing back to her. It all unraveled. Each answer tied a tighter knot around her. For the first time since Byron's funeral, I felt the balance shift fully to truth. Then Clara's moment came. She rose, tiny against the high wooden rail of the witness stand, her hands clasping the edge as if it were a lifeline. Her voice wavered at first, but steadied as she spoke. "My grandpa never left us. He built that house. He's the strongest man I know. Marla told me to ignore him, but I can't. He's my family." The room grew silent. Even the judge leaned forward, his expression softening. Clara's words cut deeper than any ledger or notarized seal. They revealed not just fraud, but cruelty, the theft of love between generations. My throat tightened, watching her stand there, her courage eclipsing her years. I realized no court ruling could carry the weight her voice had just delivered. The ruling came swiftly, Marla's claims were denied. The judge ordered her to pay fines for fraudulent filings and opened a criminal investigation into her actions. More than that, she lost guardianship over Clara's trust, a final blow that left her sitting stiff, eyes glassy, reputation shattered. The mask she wore, the one of control and superiority, broke apart in front of everyone. Murmurs spread across the courtroom. Gasps rippled like waves. Marla Duval had been exposed. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance, no gloating. The truth had spoken for itself. As the bailiff escorted her out, I lowered my gaze, thinking of Byron. My boy had loved her once. For reasons I may never understand, justice had been served, but it couldn't bring him back. It couldn't erase the nights I spent shivering in a cheap motel, wondering if my own blood would forget me. Still, it did something just as important. It gave Clara a future untouched by Marla's poison. Later, Clara and I stepped out of the courthouse hand in hand. The January sun pierced through winter clouds, a pale but hopeful light. Neighbors who once whispered doubts now nodded. Some even stopped to pat my shoulder. Sylvia Kern waited near the steps, her eyes warm, her presence steady. Harold Fitch approached too, clearing his throat before saying, loud enough for all to hear, "Elmer, I was wrong. I believed lies. I'm sorry." His words weren't easy, but they mattered. Justice doesn't erase scars, but it protects the living. That thought lingered as I squeezed Clara's hand. She smiled up at me, innocence still intact, though tempered by the fire of what we'd endured. Sylvia joined us as we walked toward the car, the crowd parting with respect I hadn't felt in years. Marla had tried to bury me with lies. In the end, she buried only herself. What stood was not just my name on a deed or papers in a folder, but my worth, etched in the eyes of my granddaughter, sealed in the respect slowly returning from my community. As Clara's small hand tightened around mine, I realized I hadn't just won back my home, I had won back my worth, and no one could ever take that away again.